Welcome to the special focus meeting of Overeaters Anonymous. Today is Wednesday, the 24th of August, 2022. We are delighted to welcome Andrew Kay to share his experience, strength and hope. Andrew came to OA in late August 2019. He grew up in Minnesota and now lives outside of Chicago. So thank you for being with us today, Andrew, and over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It is a tremendous privilege for me to be with you guys today. As it was said, I'm Andrew Kay. I'm a grateful, recovered, compulsive eater, recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, and that's what I would wish to share with you a little bit this afternoon or this morning, I guess, depending on where we are. There's a lot of very neat and interesting accents I heard in the opening here. Mine's very boring. As she said, I'm from Minnesota, so if it sounds like just a generic Midwestern accent, that's what you'll have here for the recording today. But what I want to do is just really share with you guys, my journey and program, and my hope in doing this is that, what I saw is we have some people who are very new to this program. And so I want to speak specifically to people who are newcomers, but also I've been in the rooms long enough here at almost 3 years that I know that there are people in the rooms today who are really struggling, because that's been my experience in every room I've been in since I've been here. And so I'm thrilled that there are people who are crushing it today. I'm hopeful that that's everybody, but I know that there are going to be people who are really in a hard spot right now. And so I wanted to share with you kind of an experience out of the darkness a little bit. And, not by anything that I've done, but just to offer you some identification and hopefully some hope. And so with that, I will share with you my story. Probably easiest to get some of the numbers out of the way. As Gail said, I came into the program late August of 2019. When I walked through the doors, I was 411 pounds. I have lost almost 170 pounds, and I've been maintaining that weight loss here for, some long period of time. I'm not exactly sure how long I have been absent since I came in. For the purposes of just setting the stage here, Rita, if you wouldn't mind just sharing that one picture I shared with you, if that's okay, we'll just get that out of the way. It's pretty much like every other picture I had, depending on when you saw me. I only took two types of pictures in the 38 years before I got to program. There was the type where I was really big, like I am on the left, and there was the type where I was less big, like the one that I'm on the right. And you can go ahead and take that down. The reality is that I, like perhaps many of you, really shied away from the camera. I was the guy who was 100% behind the camera all the time. I refused to be seen in pictures because pictures had this way of making me seem much fatter than I perceived that I was. It was this really odd dynamic. And so the truth is, I don't have a lot of pictures. The one that you saw there was not at my highest weight. That was about a month and a half into program. I was probably only, in quotation marks, I was probably only about 380 pounds then. But it gives you a sense of where things were. And so my story starts as a guy who has, quote unquote, always struggled in the food. For as long as I can remember, if I was eating, it simply was not enough. And the volume was there from the start. And I know that's not everybody's story, but that's my story. And the inability to be satisfied with a quote unquote normal amount of food is something that has always been my journey. Kind of simultaneously, I would say I was also always a guy who struggled with, fear, doubt, guilt, shame, insecurity, anxiousness, etc. Bill talks in the 12 and 12 about this anxious apartness, and that's my story. Fear, guilt, shame, self-doubt, etc. And I would like to tell you that makes me unique. I don't think that it does. What I have come to learn is that is really what it looks like to live in the bondage of self. And that's my story. Is I have lived, prior to program for 38 years, I lived in the bondage of self. And I wouldn't have used those words before, but that's the words I use today. And what I mean by that is I was consumed with me. I was consumed with what I looked like or didn't look like, what I felt like or didn't feel like, what you may or may not be thinking about me, which I was pretty sure was consumed you, because it was all I could think about. And especially around this area of food and weight and diet and exercise, that was my life. I mean, like, hey, listen, if I happen to be losing weight today, today's a good day, and I could, tolerate it, and we can move on, we can be friends. And if I'm gaining weight today, which was much more often the story, it's a bad day, and stay away, and I have no interest in life or people or any of those things. And so I started putting weight on, very early. I mean, I was always a pretty big kid. And so, the line between, for me, 200 in late middle school, and it came back the next summer at 260, and I came back the summer after that at 300. That's just kind of the way that I roll. And, and certainly people around me were starting to look at that and say, hey, there might be a problem here. That this is not good for you, right? I mean, to be that big, that fast, and certainly I conceptually agreed. And so I did the things that many of us do, which is I started to try to control how much I eat, because that seemed to me like the solution would be, if we could just moderate the amount of these things that I'm eating, then what, life will be okay. And so the truth is that, as I got up, for whatever reason, 300 didn't feel like that big of a problem to me, because I still felt I had a sense that, like I could dial this back in if I really needed to, or if I really wanted to. I was playing sports, I was active. I certainly was, there was some muscle there. I don't want to give you the illusion that I was rock solid or ripped or anything like that at 300 in high school. That's not true, but I was playing sports. And so in my mind, there was this justification that, that there was still this sense of control. As the big book says, the great obsession of every abnormal drinker is that someday, somehow, he will both, control and enjoy his drinking. And that is the stage for my story. And so what happened for me is, I was doing okay until I hit, even at 314, it was like, that's okay. And then the day I saw 315 on the scale, it was like the big awooga horn sounds, and life was over. Because in one day, I went from being, a guy who was reasonably in control, I thought, to somebody who was clearly out of control. And why that 315 was the magic number, I don't know, but it was. And so I did the only thing I know how to do, is I marshaled up my human willpower, and I read some books, and I went online, as many of you have probably done, and got a sense of what people do to lose weight, and came up with a plan. And it probably wasn't a great plan, but it was my plan, and I executed it very well. And in a relatively short period of time, I lost, whatever it would be to get me down to about 265 pounds. And everybody said, dude, you did it. Nice work. You lost the weight. You look good. You feel good. Still playing sports. And it's like, boom, problem solved, ready to move on to the next chapter of my life. And I proceeded to transition back into a period of quote unquote moderate eating. I don't know if any of you have ever transitioned to a period of moderate eating, but I don't do that very well. And I very quickly moved that line, and I started heading back up, and I zoomed right past 315 to about 330 this time. And we're talking relatively in, probably 6 or 7 months worth of time to put that, 80 or 90 pounds or whatever it is back on. It was kind of baffling to me, like, why I would, go to all the hard work and lose the weight. I wasn't surprised that I started to put it back on. The part that I couldn't understand is, why didn't I stop sooner? Why did I wait until I had put on all of the weight again, plus a little bit more? That was just, it just didn't really make sense to me. But I found myself in a position where I didn't know what else to do other than to try to lose the weight again. And perhaps some of you have been there. I mean, it's like, okay, this is not ideal. I get it. I screwed up again, but I will make the correction. I'll lose the weight. And then this time I won't put it back on. And so that's what I did. I did it again, and I lost the, whatever it was, 70 or 80, 90 pounds again. I reached, for me, playing college sports at what was a normal, healthy body weight. I was active in all those things. And, surely I had arrived. I mean, things were going to be okay. And as you would probably guess, if you're on the lines with me and you can relate to me, the story didn't end there. I proceeded to go back up again. And I am a guy who is literally like a human roller coaster. I've joked, prior to program, that there's two things I can do really well in life. Number one is I can lose weight really fast. And number two is I can gain weight really fast. And that's my story. Literally over the next 3 decades, I rode that roller coaster up and down. I gained and lost about 1,600 pounds before I showed up in the rooms, a program. And then, as I told you, I've lost about another 170 pounds since then. And so, as I told you, I only have 2 pictures. The picture is the left one where I was really big, and the picture is the right one where I was really small, because I wasn't taking pictures in between, because I didn't have it, didn't have any desire to let any of you see what was going on. I would just show up. I would show up to the activities or the family reunions, or I'd show up to life every other year. So if depending on when you saw me, you might think that I was a fairly normal person. Because half the time I looked like a fairly normal person, and then the other half of the time I looked like somebody who was very, very out of control. And so, because of the way that I was eating, because of the pressure starting to ratchet up from the people around me, as the book says, frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices, but that doesn't mean that people don't try it. And so there were certainly people that were stepping in behind the scenes suggesting that what I was doing was killing me, which I was not in a position to disagree with, that it was, that there was, going to be physical consequences, there was going to be social consequences, emotional consequences, et cetera, et cetera. I was just not in a position to do much about it because I was in the middle of my own struggle around the food. And I did all the kinds of crazy things that probably many of you have done with food. I mean, I hid food, I stole food, I certainly lied about food. I'm not a particularly dishonest person in quote unquote real life, but man, if we're talking about food, like I lie, not anymore, but I mean, pre-program, I lied all the time, and some of the time it was just the simple lie of omission. I mean, it's like, the actual truth may be like, well, what have you been eating? Like, geez, I don't know. I mean, this morning I had an apple. I'm not sure what happened. I mean, like, okay, at 11:59 p.m. I had, 2 sheet cakes. That wasn't really your question. What you asked me is what I've eaten today, and I told you an apple, and that's true. But I mean, obviously in hindsight, that may have been true, but it certainly wasn't the truth. And so, the hiding, the guilt, the shame, and again, just insane, bizarre behaviors around trying to, as I said, control and enjoy the food. And there was lots of times where I enjoyed the food because food did something for me that it doesn't do for normal people. And there was actually quite a few times where I controlled the food, but they were never at the same time. Even when I wasn't, actively eating out of my mind, I was white knuckling and holding on for dear life. And so it was either restricting the best I could for as long as I could until the tension, I like to think of it as a spring. If you compress the sides of a spring, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. But as you're compressing it, that tension builds up. And that was my story. I mean, I was holding on for as long as I could. The tension was building and building and building and building. And eventually it just got to be too much. And the tension would come off. And it's like the silly snakes exploding out of the can. They go everywhere. And for me, that looks like, 100 pounds in 6 months. And so, it was impacting, of course, as you can imagine. I mean, I want to speak a little bit to people on this line who are like me, who, again, I walked in at 411 pounds. And so if you're like me, you know what it's like to have difficulty sleeping at night. I mean, I know what it's like to choke for air in the middle of the night because there's so much pressure on my breathing, whether from apnea or whether, choking from reflux because of the things I'm eating. I know what it's like to break furniture. I know what it's like to struggle to, have daily hygiene habits. I mean, even just showering and going to the bathroom, it becomes very, very difficult. I know what it's like to walk into a closet, that is literally overflowing with clothes, but there's nothing in there for me to wear. I have lots of clothes that are too small. I even have some clothes that are way too big, but nothing that fits me today. And it doesn't really matter where today is. I mean, my closet looked like a department store. Many of the things still had tags on them because I couldn't maintain my weight long enough to even wear the new clothes that I bought, and so I would stuff myself into whatever the couple of items of clothes that I could wear. I'd wear the same clothes all the time because I didn't have anything else that quote unquote fit. And it would reach a point where even that became a problem. And it's like, forget this. I'm not going and buying the whatever X clothes. I'm drawing a line in the sand today, and this is it. And unfortunately, what the book says is that if you're like me, you're unable at certain times to bring into your memory with sufficient force, that humiliation or the consequences or the devastation of even a few weeks or days or weeks or months ago. And I'm paraphrasing loosely. And that's my story. I mean, all of those things that should have registered as problems. The time I came home from work, I mean, I do medical sales for a living. And if any of you have worked in healthcare, you know that hospital scrubs are really dangerous, right? Because everybody wears the same color and they just come in a variety of sizes. And so the difference between wearing a large and an extra large and a 2X and a 5X, we're all in blue scrubs and nobody knows the difference, relatively speaking. And so I had been gaining weight and gaining weight and gaining weight. And I had a time where I had to go meet with the surgeon over lunch. And it was kind of an impromptu meeting. And I rolled with my business partner by the house. He said, "Hey, dude, run up and we got to get changed up. Throw on a shirt and a tie. Let's go." And I got up, and the truth is that I didn't have anything that I could even pretend like it fit. And I had to walk downstairs and say, "I can't go." Why not? Because I don't have any clothes that fit. And that's a tremendously humiliating place to be, tremendously humiliating. And in that moment, I was convinced, like, this is it. Like, I will never go through this again. And I set out, and again, I marshaled my human willpower the best I could for as long as I could, and I lost the weight, and I didn't eat compulsively until I did again. And of course, I went right past that high part where I was there because I walked through the rooms in late August at the highest weight that I've ever been. And so that is a sense of what that looks like. I mean, if you are a person who is struggling in the pits of despair, I know what that looks like. The last 15 months before I got to program, first I lost 100 pounds in about 7 months, again, doing what I do. And then if you've read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a spot in More About Alcoholism where it says, suddenly the thought crossed my mind that maybe if I poured my whiskey in the milk, it wouldn't hurt me so much. And I had my suddenly. I mean, I was flying, I had lost all the weight, and suddenly the thought crossed my mind that maybe I needed to tweak the plan. And for me, tweaking the plan looked like sunflower seeds. And if you can eat sunflower seeds, I think that's awesome. But I'm a guy who can't. And the difference between me starting sunflower seeds that day and being in a full-on binge and gaining 108 pounds in 7 months, I couldn't even tell you when it crossed over that line, but I just know that it did. And so I was gaining weight incredibly rapidly over that last 8 months. And they talk about fun with problems, just problems. I mean, I'm the guy. I wasn't eating to escape. I was eating to overcome a physical craving. I would start and I would have to go again and again and again and more and more and more. And I ate on the way to work, and I ate at work, and I ate on the way home from work. And then when my wife had dinner prepared, of course, I ate that too. And then I got up in the middle of the night and I ate. And something happened on August 29th of 2019 that had never happened before. It wasn't particularly unusual in the way that I was eating, because again, I was eating around the clock. At 2:30 in the morning, I was doing what I did every 2:30 in the morning, and that was, I was binging. I was probably 10 or 12 bowls of Fruity Pebbles in, and 5 or 6 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in. And if you are the kind of person who eats in the middle of the night when nobody else is awake, it's a tremendously lonely place to be, because everybody else in the world is sleeping peacefully. And that's where my wife and daughters, they were asleep, and I was eating because I had to. And the thing that changed for me that had never happened in the previous 38 years is that I got a little glimpse of the truth for the first time ever, because I had always tried to convince you and everybody else that I was right on the cusp of having control, and that turned out not to be true. The truth is, and I saw it as clear as I've ever seen anything in my life at 2:30 in the morning, is I wasn't right on the cusp of having control. In fact, if you gave me the next morning and every other morning for the rest of my life, it was not going to be any appreciably better than it was right now. Sure, I may, for a day I would be okay, or even two, but that this was what it was going to be, because I simply could not control how much I eat, period. That was the truth. And I knew that to my innermost self. And this idea that I was in relatively good shape for being 411 pounds, I would have tried to convince you that too, and I would have even gone so far as to find some other people that were 411 pounds and point them out and say, see, like, I'm not that guy, I'm doing okay. And the truth is that I was totally out of control with my weight. There is no way to be 411 pounds and be a healthy body weight. I mean, unless you're like 12 feet tall, and I'm 6'3", but that's a far cry from 12 feet. There's in the illusion that I may be right on the cusp of having things reeled in was totally smashed. I knew to my innermost self that this was it. It was going to be like this forever if I didn't get help. And you know what? If you can gain 100 pounds in 8 months, or 6 or 7 months, whatever it was, I mean, I went from 300 to 400 in about 8 months. And I knew if I have another 8 months, like the last 8 months, I'm 500. And I hadn't been 500 yet, but I knew that's where, again, that's like a few bad months. In the line between 500 and 1,000, there was no illusion. I mean, in the old days, I would have said, I could never, that would never be me. And there was no illusion that couldn't be me. I am that guy. And I knew that I was that guy. And the shift for me was a little bit of humility that came in. You see, what I have realized with the benefit of hindsight is, when I talked about living in the bondage of self, a tremendous part of that is ego. It takes a tremendous ego, to be 411 pounds and believe that you have the solution. People are trying to help, and I'm saying, like, listen, I know what I'm doing. And I really at the time believed that that was true. And that's obviously saying it out loud today. I mean, I just told you I gained and lost 1,600 pounds and I was 411 pounds. No sane, rational person looks at that and says, yeah, this guy probably has a pretty good handle on what he's doing here. Let's just leave him to himself. But in my mind, like, you could not convince me otherwise that I didn't have the solution, that the answer wasn't me, that the answer wasn't I had controlled it before. I'd proven that, I thought. The fact that I had to lose the weight 100 times, should be evidence that it's out of control. But in my mind, it was evidence like I lost weight 100 times. Who else can do that? I mean, it's just absolutely bonkers. And so that ego that kept me separated from you all, I mean, why I didn't come in earlier. I mean, it was suggested to me, probably my wife suggested to come to OA about once every year for 5 or 6 years. And I didn't, and the truth is I didn't come for 2 reasons. Number one is I could not conceive that if I couldn't figure this out, that there was anybody else that had hope. I had zero faith that if I didn't know how to do it, that any of you would have the solution. That's what I thought. I thought it would literally be rooms filled with people who are 1,000 pounds. And I didn't want to go there and be like, okay, listen, we're all fat. I get it. Don't eat so many Oreos. You'll be fine. That's what I thought. My other plan was I briefly contemplated losing all the weight again. And then I would come in, at a normal weight. And then I would say, hey, listen, guys, look, I'm at a normal weight. And you would say, obviously you don't have a problem. You don't need to be here, but thank you for gracing us with your presence. And then I would go on my way and have a good life. And so all of that had been stripped away, by the food. It says, thankfully, that alcohol beat me into a state of reasonableness. That's what happened. The food was the great persuader. I stayed separate for so long because my ego was so large and because my pride was so large. And that doesn't mean that I always thought well of myself. Quite the contrary. I mean, there were certainly lots of times where I sat on my throne of judgment and looked at all of you like you were morons. But I spent an equal amount of time, living with the secret and the guilt and the shame that I'm actually a huge piece of crap. That's what I thought. And that if any of you knew the real me, that you wouldn't like me either. And that's an untenable place to be. And the only solution I knew prior to program to deal with that untenable situation was to be in the food. And unfortunately, if you're like me, when you pick up the food, I lack the ability to control it because what I've come to learn is that I think my body and my mind react differently than a normal person. And so can somebody give me I promised I was going to watch the clock. I've done a terrible job of that. Are we halfway, 3/4 of the way? Just give me a rough guess.
You've got 8 minutes, Andrew.
Perfect.
8 minutes, love.
Then let's get into solution for 8 minutes here. And so as I rolled through the rooms again, I think there was a little crack in my heart that opened up and allowed a little bit of humility in it. And I came to learn some things. I came to the rooms and I raised my hand and said, I don't know anything. And that was the truth. And it wasn't just about not knowing anything about the food and the weight and the diet and the exercise. I was pretty convinced I didn't know anything about anything. And I just wanted help. And I just raised my hand and I said, what do I do? And the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is where I found my story. It spoke to my heart in a way that nothing else ever has. And I just started in on that journey. And it's been a pretty wild ride. And I want to be real clear that it isn't anything special that I've done. Again, I'm just the guy binge eating Fruity Pebbles at 2:30 in the morning. But what happened is I got in and I learned some new information. That's where it started. And I got a little bit of identification and a little bit of hope. I started to hear people talking about food the way that I had secretly and shamefully used food my whole life. And that was actually very liberating for me because I honestly thought I was the only one, and not only were people talking about it, but I mean, like I was reading in books where people were behaving this way, like well before I was even born. Things I thought I had invented about like sneaking food, people were doing that before I was even born, like this idea that I was so terribly unique had been smashed. And so I just jumped into the deep end of the pool. And not only did I not know everything, I started learning some things that were really radical that I'd never heard before. This idea of a physical allergy, that there are certain foods, not all foods. For me, it's not all foods. It's certain foods that when I put them in my body, I cannot, predictably tell you how much I'm going to have. I can't control the amount, and does that resonate with me? Somebody asked me in the beginning, like, listen, if that were true, if your body was reacting differently, would that make sense to you? Like, I had 1,000 stories that would make sense. My wife and I, when we got our first house and her mom brought us 3 dozen brownies to celebrate, before bed, I had one, she had one. We went to bed. I got up to have another one after she was asleep. And I really only intended to eat one more because I don't want to be in trouble when the morning comes. Does anybody know that story? Like, listen, I don't want, if this gets away, it's going to be a big problem. So I'm just going to have one. but one isn't enough. It's just not. I don't know what it is. It's just not enough. So I have two, and then I have three, and then I have four, and then I have five. And about 8 or 12 in, it's like, this is really becoming a problem. Now he's going to be very upset in the morning. What am I going to do? But you know what? It's already a big problem because she's going to be upset that I had 12 brownies. Like, whatever, forget it. And I ate 3 dozen brownies, and then I finally could go to bed. I mean, does that sound like an abnormal reaction to food to me? Like, yeah, that makes sense. They talked about this obsession of the mind, that my brain works around food differently than a normal temperate eater. Does that make sense? Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, who else, would if you gained 100 pounds once, like, okay, it got away from you. It happens. You were a little sedentary, you ate a little too much, better luck next time, get it figured out, lose weight, you'll be okay. Even a second time, I could maybe think like, that wasn't very smart, but you're busy, life got away from you, whatever.
5 minutes.
But thank you, Rita. But dozens of times, who signs up for that dozens of times? It is just ludicrous. It's baffling to think that somebody would do that unless, again, they had something about them that was abnormal, something that was unique. And so I have come to believe that if you're like me, you're bodily and mentally different from your fellows. And there are real consequences of that. Anybody who ate like I ate would get to be the size that I get. That's not the problem. I came in convinced that the food and the weight were the problem. I really thought that. And I don't think that today, because if the food and the weight were the problem, then I would be fixed. I haven't eaten any of those alcoholic foods or ingredients since August 29th of 2019. It's coming up on, it'll be 3 years here pretty soon. I'm pretty sure that's worked its way out of my system by now. And if it was just the weight, I was so sure when I came in that the weight was the problem, that if I could just lose the weight, and then I'd be at a normal, healthy body weight, then I would be okay with me, and you'd be okay with me, and I could start life fresh and all that. If that were true, I have been in a normal body weight for a person of my size and frame for a couple of years now, and the truth is that none of those solve the problem. The problem for me is the restless and the irritable and the discontent and the selfish and the self-seeking, the dishonest and the afraid. I mean, what we'd call spiritual malady stuff, what the book would call spiritual malady. And that hasn't gone away. It's a lot better than it was, but that's the problem. That's, the food for me is the solution to the problem. The food, it says we drink because we like the effect produced by the food. And that's my story, the sense of ease and comfort. I know what it's like to grab the frosting and go, and in my experience, life builds up to a point where that it's either going to be that, which does work for a very, very brief moment in time, like about 2 or 3 seconds, or I can get relief from working the steps. And that's where I have found my relief today. And what the book promises as a result of working the steps, and does match my experience, is that we'll be safe and protected from the food. I'm experiencing neutrality today around the food. Not only am I not eating those things, but I have no desire to eat those things. There's a whole world that's opened up that doesn't include what I eat. And it's a world I didn't even know existed. And so in the 2 minutes I have left, I want to give you guys just a sense of hope again, not because I've done anything great. God's been really cool through this process, but relationships are being restored. Life is getting pretty good, right? I mean, I can get out of bed and I can walk down the stairs in the morning, and it doesn't take me 10 or 12 steps of excruciating pain just to kind of get the kinks worked out. And if you're like me, you know what that's like to take that step out of bed. It's painful. I have pictures today. One of the amends I've made to my girls, I robbed my girls of years and years and years of having pictures with their dad out of my own selfishness and self-centeredness, nothing else, because it was always about me. And so I have pictures with him today, lots actually, because the deal is if they want a picture, they get it. No questions asked. And so the ability to be present. I've had Thanksgivings and Christmases with my girls. I've had birthday parties with my girls where I haven't even been in the bathroom with cookies in my pockets. I've just been there putting my heart on serving them. And it's a pretty radical place to be if you're somebody as selfish as I am, because I spent a lot of birthday parties yelling at people because I was mad at myself, because I had eaten things that I said I wasn't going to eat, because I was hiding in the bathroom with cookies in my pockets, because you had the audacity to take a picture of me when I wasn't even ready, which made me look really fat. Give me the camera so I can smash it into a million pieces. Living in that bondage is no way to live. And by God's grace today, that's not the place that I am. And so it has been, it's a growth process. It's been a journey. It's been a lot of learning through the steps. I'm not nearly as generous and great as I thought I was when I came into program. I'm actually a pretty selfish, self-centered person. I'm so selfish that even like when I try to do things like make breakfast in bed for my girls, sometimes it's not about them. It's about me still, because if they're not doing cartwheels around the kitchen to tell me how awesome I am and how lucky they are to have me as a dad, I'm like, hey guys, what give? Like, oh, wait a minute, that's me again. Yeah, and so that's really what it's about today. Is it's about constantly. It is a program, in my experience, of ego reduction. It's a program of humility. That's where I am today. That's what I continue to do the work on today, is to try to become who I was made to be and to serve in the role that I was called to serve. And I'm hopeful that part of that is what you and I were able to do today. So I'm very, very grateful to share with you guys. I'm so glad that you're here. It's amazing to me that 155 people could jump on a computer from all over the world, on a Wednesday morning or evening or afternoon, depending on where you are, and sharing this fellowship. It's a tremendous privilege. So with that, I thank you guys, and I'll pass.